In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of men can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense, and today it still is common sense.
I'm Mark Zaccaria.
I'm April G. Russo. This is Common Sense. Welcome back. I'm guessing you did not tune in only to check out the new look. I'm willing to bet that you may have already heard that the Unified Health Infrastructure Project, or UHIP, is finally online. Or you may have heard that the new system is a tool of Satan because social workers are now being reassigned. As usual, the truth is somewhere in the middle. We'll analyze. How about the fashionable push for solar energy? Are you here to find out the latest? We'll have that too. Or maybe the crescendo of political campaigns has deafened you and you'd like to have someone, anyone, step in to take control. Sorry folks, we're here to explain that one's on you. How? Stay tuned. Of course, you'll also see an in-depth interview. This week, Mark sits in for State Rep Patricia Morgan as Ambassador J. William Middendorf II returns for a follow-up session on the global threats facing our republic. Fascinating stuff, and from a man who's lived most of the important changes of the last 9 decades. In between segments of that interview, Mark and I will pop back in to ask the immortal question, are you kidding me? Finally, we'll hear from Jeff Richard with his commentary on military retirement advantages in Florida. Let's start it all off with analysis of some of the top news stories affecting Rhode Islanders this week. Mark?
Thanks, April. Fans of our program will remember that we've devoted much coverage to Rhode Island's new Unified Health Infrastructure Project, or UHIP. Although the custom software-hardware system is 50% over its production timeline and left its original cost estimates in the dust years ago, it is about to finally go online. There's no doubt the 30-year-old system it replaces has long outlived its effectiveness. It is still concerning, though, that much of the cost overrun associated with this development is based on the fact that state managers were constantly expanding the core specs of what they wanted. Every time something new was added to the functional specifications, the engineers had to use unforecast billable hours to implement it. The result of that prolonged game of moving targets is not only a $380 million price tag, but also a creepy variation on the theme of George Orwell's Big Brother. The UHIP will soon be actively searching existing Department of Human Services files to identify additional entitlements for any client who has a profile. In advance of bringing UHIP online, DHS Director Melba DePena-Afigne announced that its use would immediately result in the layoff of some 70 DHS staffers, whose functions would now be redundant. Most of these are social workers. Their departure to other state departments will result in something like a $3.5 million decrease in annual DHS costs. Director Afigne touted that savings without making any mention of the increases in benefit payouts that will result from UHIP making programs available to individuals who never applied for them. My guess is that had we stuck to the original specs, we would have upgraded our data handling for required tasks long ago. We would then have been able to reassign staff more than a year ago without facing any of the looming increases in expense associated with giving clients payouts they don't need. So instead of looking at an overall increase in departmental expenses, we might have seen actual savings after a 2 or 3 year payback for system development. We here at Common Sense hope that Department of Administration Director Michael DiBiase is pondering on that missed opportunity right now. April?
Thanks, Mark. Bristol, Rhode Island could be the next town to turn a former landfill into a solar farm, following the lead of East Providence in 2013. Bristol's hopeful site is not as large as the one in East Providence, which spans 229 acres, but may still be appealing to renewable energy developers. Councilman Edward Stewart Jr. is one of the leaders pushing for this transformation. He has helped organize town workshops on putting together its request for proposals. He believes that Bristol needs to start working on this project, one that has been useful to other cities. East Providence pioneered the use of closed landfills for solar arrays in 2013. It took $9 million to install 12,848 photovoltaic panels, and it has been so successful that work will soon begin to double the solar farm from 3.7 megawatts to 7.7 megawatts. Mark?
Thanks, April. Here's a news flash. 2016 is a presidential election year. Okay, unless you've been in a meditative state in the remotest part of the Alton Jones campus for 18 months or so, you knew that already. Still, this year's White House sweepstakes seems to have been much more of a race to the bottom than usual. It's caused political pundits from the national networks all the way down to tiny little common sense to ask whether or not one or the other candidate was qualified to hold office. In fact, last week, former Rhode Islander and prolific political commentator Mark Curtis wrote an entire Sunday political brunch column on the subject. For any of you hermits who really have been living out in the woods for months on end, let's welcome the same national discourse to Little Rhodey. There are similar questions which should be asked in every single state and local race. And the answer is very simple. The only qualification cited in the Rhode Island Constitution is that a candidate must be a qualified elector. Now that land ownership requirements are a thing of the distant past, that means any citizen who is registered to vote may run for office. But what of all these attack questions being lobbed by the national media? Does this presidential candidate or that have the right composure or disposition for the office? Are either of them healthy enough for the job? Do either or both resumes pass muster? Wait, what muster? There's nothing in the state or U.S. Constitution about any of that. There will be no special prosecutor impaneled to check candidates' teeth for excessive signs of aging. Folks, we can't pass that off onto the government. It is our responsibility. Each of us has to learn what we can about the candidates we'll vote for so we can each vet our own choice. If we'd known about Ray Gallison's use of the Ocean State budget as his personal ATM, we'd have voted him out rather than having to wait for him to resign. How about John Carnevale's actual address? If that had been understood, we wouldn't have had to wait for action by the Providence Board of Canvassers. It is easy to give egregious examples of when we certainly should have voted the bums out. The difficult decision we each have to wrestle with as Election Day looms is when to vote the bums in. Good luck with that. But remember, it's important. So do the best job you can. April?
Thanks, Mark. Up next is a fascinating follow-up interview with 21st century Renaissance man, Ambassador Bill Middendorf. Before we get to its first segment, though, let's pause for just a moment, because I think someone is about to ask the all-important question. Are you kidding me?
Okay. Everything under the dome of heaven operates on cycles. We are aware of most of them, whether we acknowledge that or not. We know that the full moon means moon tides, so it may be time to double the lines on the boat. We know the first robin of spring is a harbinger of warmer weather, just as we know that when the constellation Orion rises in our south, it means our northern hemisphere is tilting away from the sun for its winter chill. Everything happens because of a natural order. So too with elections. In this case, however, there's a reason they call it the silly season. Are you kidding me? Oh, where to begin? This is a short segment, so let's just look at Congressman David Cicilline's proposed new bill entitled the Making College More Affordable Act. A pitch-perfect name for an election year spending extravaganza. Mr. Cicilline promises to enter his bill when the House resumes its session in September. He promises that his bill will forcibly lower payments and interest rates on existing student debt. He says it will also eliminate all interest for those who make their payments on time. He doesn't say where all that money is going to come from. But no matter, I promise you that the fall session of the federal legislature in an election year will not pass this or any other non-essential spending bill. So I can also promise you that, like bringing donuts to the old age homes, Congressman C believes just promising these goodies will bring him votes. Moreover, those votes, in his estimation, will come from constituents who'll soon conveniently forget his promised bill, which is good because it will never happen. College costs too much because government made it cost too much. Student loans cost too much because the government did not permit them to be managed by the banking industry. Mr. Cicilline is as guilty as anyone in Washington for blindly supporting those anti-free market initiatives in order to pander in the short term. So he had a hand in creating an untenable situation with student debt. Instead of getting to work on promoting the free market so our economy would grow us out of this mess, he'd rather lie to you about having the fix in hand. No wonder they call it the silly season. Oh, not because of Cicilline's antics, no, because you and I buy this act and others like it so often. Are you kidding me?
Right, team, listen up. It's Mark from the bunker. I'm down here in my listening post in the cellar of the Rhode Island State House, and you know what? I hear things. I hear some of the legislators upstairs getting real worried about losing their jobs. I hear others of them saying, never happen. Okay, the primary is next week. Primary day is coming up. Are you going to vote? Nellie Gorbea says the chances are no. She says we're going to have a primary and no one is going to show. What? Okay, you go to any social event anywhere, you talk politics to anybody, and what do you hear? Everyone's got an opinion, and they're fiery about it. How many times have you heard them say, whoever's in is out? Oh, all those guys are bums. We got to get rid of them, right? Clean house. Clean Senate, too. Okay, well, what's the best way to do that? It's in the primary. Look, the incumbent Democrats who have had that place by their short hairs for decades, there's like 9 or 10 of them that got real, no-kidding primaries. So if you're in one of those districts, you better get your bony butt out there and vote, because otherwise it ain't going to happen. Look, follow my lead. I'm going to vote in 6 different districts at least, 7 if I got time. You can make it to at least 1. Hey, it's Mark from the bunker. I'm out.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Common Sense, the program that tries to make sense of the world around us all. Thank you for joining us, and I am thrilled to be here today to have a little time with Ambassador J. William Middendorf II. Bill Middendorf is many, many wonderful things. At the bottom line, he's a Rhode Islander and a treasure for not only our state but our nation. We're going to talk a little bit about the follow-up to an interview he gave to Pat Morgan just about a year ago. Ambassador, once again, I want to thank you for making time in your busy schedule to spend some time to follow up with us on some of the wisdom that you put before us about a year ago when you last did an interview for Common Sense. Just to get some of our viewers up to speed, you are a person who has led a long and extremely full life. You have been, in my estimation, an athlete, a naval officer, an artist, a composer, an entrepreneur, politician, a diplomat, cabinet secretary, and with all of this, you still do a watercolor or a pastel or 2 or 3 per day?
All these are mine.
Everything you could see around.
Yeah.
You are a prolific...
That's Edward Heath. I was Prime Minister when I was Secretary, and I asked if I could sketch him, and of course, he said, sketch me naturally. I said, all right, I'm going to put a glass of scotch in the picture.
And there it is.
There it is.
Excellent. You have had experiences as an athlete in the U.S. National Field Hockey Team, if I recall. You were a member of the U.S. Olympic Committee. Was it as Secretary of Navy that you founded the U.S. Marine Corps Marathon?
Yeah.
And ran in it yourself how many times?
8 times.
8 times. God bless.
I don't recommend it for young people after 2 knee operations.
Well, there could be a straight line between those 2 items. But you were a student at Holy Cross, at Harvard, at business school in New York was
NYU.
NYU.
Yeah.
And
Graduate of the Year, they gave me an honor.
Graduate of the Year, right? You had a career in finance on Wall Street that included a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. you were ambassador not just to Netherlands, but to the European, it was the precursor to the European Union.
It's called European Economic Community, and then later became the European Union.
Right. And of course, the Organization of American States
Yeah,
as well.
Latin America. Yeah.
So 3 ambassadorial assignments, and not necessarily easy ones. I mean, there was a lot going on,
That's right.
especially in the European community and the OAS.
Well, OAS with Grenada and,
Mhm.
and the Falklands Wars, and a lot of excitement there.
There was drama. And of course, you were the Secretary of the Navy,
Yeah,
and during that assignment, you're responsible for a number of the weapon systems that are still in use today. In fact, mainstays of the Navy, some would say.
yeah,
And
I think so.
then founding chair of the Defense Forum Foundation and the Monetary Research Foundation,
Yeah,
and the Heritage Foundation, International Republican Institute. I'm sure I could go on and on.
yeah.
So there can be no question about your bona fides. And you're a young man with a bright future of what now, 92?
92.
92 years of age.
Well, in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks. Okay, well, happy birthday. The fact of the matter is that it's been my privilege to know a little bit more about you than many people might, and to have had interactions with you over the years. And so when I say you have made a spot in your schedule for us, I'm not kidding around. You get calls all the time from European and South American and American interests on matters of economics, on military and strategic policy, and also on monetary policy. Do you not?
Well, Arthur Fiedler once told me when I was conducting the Boston Pops on a piece I'd written called Old Ironsides, and for the Navy Night of the Pops. And he said, I said, Arthur, you've been conducting this for 50 years. What's your secret? He says, to rest is to rot.
A famous term from Arthur Fiedler. You've clearly taken that to heart, and all of us should do the same. The last time we spoke, your overriding concern for the state of our nation today was, or had to do, if I recall correctly, with a sort of a lack of strategic thinking on the part of the White House. Would you agree that is that still a concern of yours, and how would you elaborate?
Well, the term strategic thinking, of course, is pretty broad. The issue is we're not building the long-range weapon systems, the long lead-time weapon systems that we need for the prospective threats from China and Russia, North Korea and Iran 10 years out. We know pretty much in 1992, 1975, 74 and 75, when I was secretary, Admiral Rickover and Admiral Holloway and Arleigh Burke and all the best brains in the Navy Department, and myself, of course, not a brain, but I mean, as a team leader, I assembled them and said, folks, we know the Russians are going to have their apogee of power in the late 1980s, at which time, of course, they threatened to take over all of Europe and probably the world with their weapon systems. We know what they're building, and we know what we're building. We've had a peace dividend after Vietnam, so we've decelerated it, so to speak. So we have to rebuild our structure so we can have modern weapon systems to offset them. At that time we built, because it's a 10-year lead time to build any weapon system, we built the Aegis missile system, the anti-missile defense, the best in the world, the Trident submarine, which can stay under the sea for 90 days undetected without putting up a periscope, and it's the world's greatest weapon system, in my opinion. It can launch sea-launched nuclear warheads thousands of miles and undetected at sea. And the F-18 and many other programs. There's the F-18 up there, and many other programs. And in the and when we had the post-mortem with the Russians in 1991 in Moscow with the heads of their military, heads of our military. We came together and they told us that they admired most Ronald Reagan because he had a backbone and he went ahead and built these systems. They couldn't match us.
So you have proven, in essence, that strength is the way to maintain peace worldwide, and you lived it as Secretary of the Navy. We're going to take a break right now to end our first segment. Again, thank you very much for your insights. We'll be back in just a moment, folks. I think someone's about to ask the question, are you kidding me?
After multiple controversies, 2 suspensions, and a 4-2 vote, the Board of Elections has released Executive Director Robert Kando. It actually happened. After all the criticism, name-calling, crying, and bitching, on our part, of course, because this schmuck got second chance after second chance, Kando is finally fired. Are you kidding me? Take a sigh of relief. You earned it after putting up with him all this time. Of course, the Board of Elections claims that they were moving on because they want someone who is a little bit more innovative. Couldn't possibly have anything to do with the fact that he's been suspended twice at that job. Didn't have any practical work experience in elections when he took the job. Let's see, a previous dismissal as a deputy clerk of the Rhode Island District Court due to insubordination, inappropriate closed-door dealings, his hesitancy to sign up for management classes, which were a stipulation of one of his suspensions, or that it is unclear that he might not have completed those courses, again, as stipulated per his suspension. I'll let the viewing audience take their pick and let the Board of Elections stand by their stance on innovation. Whatever gets the job done, right? But this letting go isn't quite the fiery debacle we expected it to be. I mean, it could be, because Kando can fight the dismissal. But the real question is about the severance package. We know how sweet those severance packages are for state employees, especially ones that the leadership just wants to quiet down and sweep under the rug quickly. Want to start taking bets on how much that pink slip is going to cost the taxpayers? Are you kidding me?
Red team, listen up. It's Mark from the bunker. Yeah, it's my listening post in the cellar of the Rhode Island State House. So far they don't know I'm here, but we gotta keep quiet about it. What am I hearing? I'm hearing that people upstairs are jumping up and down, freaking out over a letter that was sent by the University of Chicago to the incoming freshman class. That's happening out in Chicago and people here are being nuts about it? Well, it turns out the university in their letter said that these newbies should forget about victimhood. They should come in and they should stiffen up a little bit because there's no place for trigger warnings and safe spaces academically at the University of Chicago. Get ready to fight your way to adulthood, they said. Fight your way academically. You know what? It's true. College is supposed to be a cage match. A cage match of ideas. Okay, but these guys who are playing victim are wasting time and they're missing the action. You know, the sad part of this entire thing is that this had to be said in the first place. Come on. You know what happened? You don't want to know what happened to me, but listen, everyone gets rights, but everyone's rights get abused and you have to assert yourself. Maybe it'll happen here too. That's why they're mad. It's Mark from the bunker. I'm out.
Ambassador Middendorf, thanks again for taking time out of your schedule to be with us on Common Sense TV today. Let's talk a little bit about Russia. Last time we spoke, about a year ago, you mentioned that the incoming chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Marine General, said, when asked during his confirmation hearings, what was the biggest threat, said Russia.
Yeah.
And that surprised a lot of members of Congress at the time because they hadn't been thinking in those terms. They were thinking ISIS, they were thinking Iran, Iraq. Do you agree that Russia is the biggest immediate threat?
Russia and China. Russia's developed a new missile called the S-500 missile, and they're supplying the S-400 to Iran right now. It's the greatest, most successful any missile defense in the world right now. And they've also, Russia and China are working on missiles that will go 13,000 miles an hour, hypersonic. And the best we have right now, the Aegis, the anti-missile defense we have now is about 4,000 miles an hour. We can hit a missile coming in at 4,000, but they're moving very fast. They're in stage 3 almost, so their missile development, we're still in stage 1. And
So that goes back to what we were saying in the last segment about thinking ahead, not just on development, but on the threats, so that the development meets
of course,
those.
a nuclear warhead today from Russia or China would be 1,300 times that of Nagasaki. It would not just take out New York, but probably all of New York State and New England, what have you. So this is a much more threatening world than it was after World War I or even in the Cold War when I was active. So we obviously have to move fast to rebuild our military, our long lead time programs. We have very able ships, we have very able planes and what have you. But that's not the point. You can't be stagnant. You have to build for the future, and we know that they're building rapidly for the future. China has a lot of money. They're a wealthy nation now, and they can afford to build very advanced weapon systems, and they're doing so.
Okay. Now, when we talk about Russia, one of the things that most people will remember is that we've seen recent military action by the Russians in the Crimea. And they're massed today on the border of the remainder of the Ukraine, and there's a real question as to what happens next there. Do you?
I think we have to look beyond that. When Russia was able to acquire, like the Germans acquired Sudetenland in 1938, I remember it very well. When the Russians were able to acquire the Crimea without any downside for them, a little bit of a sanction that doesn't mean anything. It means something, but it's not significant. They got away with murder, so to speak. And now they're threatening the eastern Ukraine to have land access to Crimea. China, so emboldened, saw that we were a paper tiger, pretty much, and went ahead and developed the Spratly Islands way beyond their territorial rights. And even the UN, which is usually not very judicial in my books, wrapped their knuckles the other day and said that they've violated the rights of the Philippines, Malaysia, and and Vietnam, other countries that had territorial rights in the same area. So China's on the move, Russia's on the move. The real threat, I think, if we let our guard down in the next several years, is that Russia will try to reinvent its empire and take the Baltics, especially Estonia and Latvia and what have you. And they've been making noises to that effect anyway. They've massed forces in that area on training programs. Of course, Europe is very much aware of this risk, and some of the Baltic countries are actually raising their weapons programs, raising their military expenditures. But what is tragic is that Europe has let its guard down and dropped down to, on average, about 1% for spending on defense, and NATO, and we're spending 4 and a fraction percent. We're actually spending about 70% or more of the total NATO budget, which is unconscionable. There should be more of a burden sharing there, particularly since they're the countries that are immediately threatened.
You can understand that the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, are very, very concerned and are arming up as much as they can in fairly small territories. But if America's a paper tiger, is Europe a paper mache tiger? I mean, they have let their guard down even farther than we have. I have a question for you on the Russian incursion in Ukraine, and then to any further incursions they may be considering. Is that a means on the part of the Russian government to cover some of the shortcomings they have economically? Are they using the military drums to cover the fact that things at home are bad?
I mean, that's what Galtieri did in the Falkland War.
Mm-hmm.
He invaded the Falklands in order to cover up his economic malaise, which had been caused by him. Socialism always causes an economic malaise. And So in the end, and so usually external adventures are taken on by countries like that. But in this case, I think the real prize is the Baltics. Putin is very anxious to rebuild the Soviet empire that he had, that was lost under Yeltsin.
Doing that for the diplomatic importance of reasserting national power? Is that what is it there for? I mean, I can understand the Spratly Islands, the Chinese, they may be looking for oil. There are resources down there that they might need, but what do you have in the Baltics?
I mean, the Spratly Islands is not just oil. It's to restrict access. For example, if it makes it a strategic strait, like the Malaccan Straits or the Straits of Hormuz, once the Chinese have control of the South China Sea.
But then what's the analog to
And
the Baltics?
50% of all the world's commerce goes through those straits, and 90% of all the energy to Asia goes through those straits.
Yeah, so militarily it's very important. But then what does Putin get with the Baltics?
Access to the sea.
Access to the Baltic
Yeah.
Sea. Okay.
See, the new wars are going to be fought from under the sea and from space. With the DF-21 missile the Chinese have developed, although we're not sure that they've fully developed it, surface warfare combatants are going to be at risk, serious risk. So the emphasis now for the modern nations is to build under the sea submarines and sea-launched cruise missiles from them, from space platforms, the EMP threat to knock out the utilities of a potential adversary, and the satellite missiles that Russia and China have been developing very, very rapidly.
I'd like to go into the EMP threat, especially a little bit more detail, but we're coming to the end of our segment, and so let's take a break right now, and we'll come back after one more question. Are you kidding me? So, pretend you're a detective, and you're following this trail of clues. The city of Providence is broke, dead busted. National Grid wants to build a new industrial facility on the waterfronts in Providence. Mayor Elorza says, no way. Can he spell the word property taxes? The new infrastructure is supposed to process and distribute liquefied natural gas. The mayor's problem is that gas is not green enough. Well, despite that, the good people of Providence have an ever-increasing appetite for electricity, which will cost them more than need be without the LNG. Finally, RI Future applauds the mayor for shooting his constituents in the foot this way. What's your conclusion, Sherlock? Here's mine. Are you kidding me? We're not talking about burning animal dung inside a yurt with no chimney. This is clean burning gas for use by the approved public utility. And by the way, it's gas which happens to cost orders of magnitude less than every green energy option except hydroelectric. Also, LNG is far safer and far more reliable than wind or solar. Oh, and by the way, there are no major wind or solar development plans on the drawing board for the capital city. So let me go over this one more time. The mayor votes no on a no-cost, revenue-generating plan for his bankrupt city. Well, that's not because anyone is suggesting that we pave the streets with arsenic. It's because Mayor Elorza would prefer to have the applause of the Sierra Club to having lowered costs and the economic growth that goes along with it. Does the Sierra Club pay taxes in Providence? Am I missing something here? Or is this just yet another instance of bizarro world coming to pass on the Narragansett Bay? Are you kidding me? We're back with Ambassador J. William Middendorf, and sir, this has been fascinating. We were talking about the geopolitical ambitions of both Russia and China. Can we talk just a little bit about what their capabilities are? I mean, one of the first questions that comes to my mind when we think about the economies of each, and especially Russia's being a bit fragile, are they in a position to sustain a general war?
You'll recall that the Soviet gross national product was just a fraction of ours and a fraction of Germany's. But if you spend 60% of your gross national product on weapons systems and projecting power, and the hell with the population and their needs, which is what the communists did during the Cold War, then the economy means nothing. They're just going to obviate. Look at North Vietnam. They're spending an outrageous amount of their gross national product on
North Korea?
North Korea, on being able to project power, developing these new warheads and nuclear warheads and what have you, and submarine launched.
So the answer in both of these totalitarian states is yes.
Yeah.
What does it look like for us?
The thing to remember is that the Vietnam War was 7 or 8, 9 years. The Iraqi War and this Middle Eastern War is even longer. It's now 15 years. World War II was 3.5 to 4 years. The next war could be 30 minutes. For example, let me give you a scenario, and it's one that certainly the Chinese and the Russians are thinking about. And you know, they've joined forces now. It's similar to the Ribbentrop-Molotov Agreement of 1940. Whether they'll stay together, I don't know, but certainly at the moment, it's the greatest threat this country or the free world has ever faced. I'm talking about from the point of view of them being able to project power against CONUS, the United States. The next war could easily be a space-launched missile coming vertically down from China to Russia, or Russia, against which there's virtually no defense. It could be the beginning of the war unannounced, following perhaps an EMP attack over Omaha, let's say 250 miles up, with a simple nuclear warhead, which would knock out 60 to 80% of all the utilities in this country. Food production would end, and transportation, everything. The Defense Department says that 80% of the population would be dead in 9 months of the U.S. population.
Because of the lack of infrastructure and the inability to survive without the things we're used to.
The Walmart shelves would be empty in a half an hour.
Yeah.
And where is the food going to come from? Or even water, and so to speak, and shelter and what have you. Everything would grind to a halt.
Just for the audience, EMP is an electromagnetic pulse,
yes,
and it induces very high currents in anything electronic or electrical. And so what it would do is overload transformers. It would probably melt the boards in your cell phones. Those sorts of it would be general destruction to anything electronic.
And it's a capability that North Korea has today. Iran has, Russia and China, of course, and it's a very simple nuclear warhead, and North Korea is moving so fast to develop a sea-launched nuclear warhead. Perhaps that's their ultimate goal.
So the threat of a general war is real. It could be sustained. Anyone can sustain it for 30 minutes.
The threat of a general war is a constant. It's always there. Communism, by definition, they're cowards and bullies at the same time. They're cowards when they see us strong, and they'll wait their time. They're very patient, particularly China. And a bully when they see they have an advantage, as they saw in Crimea.
Okay, so in this scenario, there are subplots. There are smaller things going on that probably are, to some extent, surrogates from the Russians and the Chinese. I'm thinking about Iran and some of their
certainly
escapades.
Iran and North Korea, who are satellites of those two big powers, and certainly the Spratlys and Crimea are advanced steps in the scenario of taking over the world.
The last time you spoke to us, about a year ago, you suggested that the Iran nuclear deal, which was just about completed at that time, was being shown, as it came to light, to be completely one-sided, and you felt that the Iranians would violate it from day one. Has that happened, in your opinion?
Of course, violated before day one.
So they essentially played along the U.S. State Department and, by extension, the White House.
They're very naive, very naive. I mean, they wanted to leave a legacy that they made a deal, any kind of a deal. And you know yourself in life, if you make any kind of a deal, if you're going to buy a used car and you're just bent on making a deal and buying a car, and the dealer may well take advantage of you and perhaps give you faulty brakes.
Is Iran, in general, in your opinion, a worse threat than North Korea?
No, both of them are a threat. Both of them are developing long-range missiles. Iran can certainly, being supplied with long-range missiles by the Russians, can certainly reach most of Europe with a nuclear warhead in time. And obviously, Europe is not known for its courage, so to speak. You saw how quickly they collapsed in World War II. And would they try to make an accommodation? And would the Southeast Asian countries try to make an accommodation with China? Not impossible. For example, I met with a number of the naval attachés from, I think, 17 different Asian countries a few months back, and they all assured me that if the United States stands firm, they'll hold their coats, so to speak. I don't get the impression that when the Southeast Asia Council met recently, and they didn't even mention the UN resolution condemning China. So they don't want to offend China because too many trade and investment correlations.
So they're afraid of China, but not necessarily afraid of the United States.
Nobody's afraid of the United States.
So, in other words, if...
And why should they be afraid of us? We're not going to attack them.
Well, that is... I think that's the core of the problem right now. As you said, the president and his entire administration has been focused on trying to make any kind of a deal that they could point to afterwards and say, this is our legacy, and we should be the fifth face on Mount Rushmore. But the fact of the matter is that in doing so, they've given away the store just to get a deal, and maybe finding that that deal isn't worth as much as they had hoped. Now, the demonstration of resolve for war that precedes the negotiations with Europe and with the Southeast Asian countries would be a smaller version of what comes if you don't go along. I think that in Iran's case, their first target would be Israel, would it not?
I don't think so.
No?
I don't think. I mean, I think that if Iran and Russia and China and North Korea's goal is to take over the world, I think they're bigger targets.
That's interesting. On that note, what we will do is take a break for as we get ready for our final segment. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. This is fantastically interesting. But right now, it's time to ask the question: are you kidding me?
Quite possibly one of the most heinous crimes ever was recently committed against a Rhode Island family. And before you get going, I bet you're expecting me to bring up some sort of shady political deal. This is common sense after all. Shady political deals are our bread and butter. But no, this was a much simpler, but also much grosser crime. It's like taking candy from a baby. Or to be more accurate, it's like taking money from a cancer-stricken baby. Are you kidding me? Baby Caden has spent most of the 15 months of his life living at Hasbro Children's Hospital while he fights cancer. A recent event was held to help raise money for his treatment, and it was reported afterwards that $2,000 donated dollars were stolen from the family. Wow. I was optimistic that this level of douchebaggery didn't really exist, but it looks like I am mistaken. To add insult to injury, the money was taken from the hospital room in which the family slept. The father's wedding ring was even taken. Come on, people. My mind is blown. I kind of want to make a joke about a disgraced politician sneaking in and stealing money from a sick child, but let's face it. There's no real way for this story to get more disgusting. So if you are the person who stole money from this family and happen to be a viewer of Common Sense, which, let's face it, you're definitely not. At least I really hope you're not. But anyway, please make sure that money is returned to the family that desperately needs it. Are you kidding me?
Ambassador, we've been talking about some of the more frightening aspects of what the future may hold. One of the questions that's in my mind goes back to one of your earlier careers in finance, and I'm wondering about the future of U.S. and world financial markets as we understand them today. Currency, its value, how that is transferred. There's an age of computers that's going to impact that. There's an age of inflation that's going to impact that. May I have your thoughts?
Well, right now, there are $60 trillion worth of sovereign debt around the world, of bonds that actually you can negotiate by. Put that in perspective, the entire mortgage market in the United States is only $10 trillion. U.S. has a debt of $20 trillion of that $60 trillion. But that's only a small fraction of the debt that's out there. There's the debt against pension funds, there's the debt against retirement benefits, all the medical benefits that have been promised, and Medicare, Medicaid, what have you, involving hundreds of trillions of dollars. The world has never seen a debt load like this in relation to the gross national products of individual countries. And debt has been piled on very heavily because of very low interest rates. This is the first, never in 5,000 years has there ever been a negative interest rate, as in Europe, and now they're prospecting that idea here. Obviously something's about to burst. You can't have negative interest rates with a couple of $100 trillion worth of debt, unfunded debt obligations. So
a negative interest rate is where somebody gives you money to take money
that's
from
right.
them.
That's right.
And that obviously would erase all of that debt if you gave it enough time.
That's right.
And so the debt now becomes meaningless.
Well, the debt is meaningful because it's going to have to be paid as these younger people move into retirement and what have you. That there's going to have to be funding for their. Right now, the Social Security is not funded. The funds are not there. It's an obligation of the U.S. government, and all these other benefits are the same. They're not funded. And in other words, the United States is going as this millennium generation moves on. They're going to expect all the benefits that they have been promised, and the only way that's going to happen is inflation. Inflation will start small, as in the Weimar Republic, and then accelerate. We're not any different from operating as the Weimar Republic in 1920-23 in Germany, and I don't think we're any smarter.
Well, obviously not if we're going to be repeating the mistakes of history.
Yeah.
I guess then what that means is that even though that debt could be paid off by the meaningless money that will evolve from hyperinflation, there will be a catharsis in financial markets where, such as in Weimar, you have to start all over again essentially from scratch.
They did in 1924. They just threw away all the paper. Wheelbarrows took a wheelbarrow to buy paper money to buy a loaf of bread.
I remember a story, since you are a composer and very familiar with philharmonic orchestras. There was a philharmonic orchestra in Germany in that time whose contract required that they be paid during intermission, so that the musicians could run out and spend it.
That's right.
Because by the second act, it was worth less.
Worth half. I have a $100 trillion note here from Zimbabwe, and that's the highest inflation rate in world history. I think 5 years before it became 100 trillion to the dollar, it was $1 to the dollar. That shows how fast it can go. They've since repealed the $100 trillion note. But it would take an awful lot more than a wheelbarrow full of them to buy a loaf of bread.
So what should the U.S. government be doing now to prepare to counteract this threat?
Well, right now, of course, we should let interest rates, we should stop subsidizing all of this by reducing interest rates and let the market operate freely and let the interest rates float the way they should. Right now, we've been subsidizing an awful lot of this, as has Europe, with extremely low interest rates.
The very first thing that happens when the U.S. government does that is that there's a tremendous amount of political pain, because right now servicing the interest on the national debt is a huge problem, and interest rates are effectively zero. If it goes up to 2 or 3%, we could be in a very big political problem.
Well, it would force us to stop spending on every vote buying program and start tightening our belts, as you and I and Roland have to do in our daily lives.
So it is, in effect, a valid example to say, look at what you do in your own home with your own checkbook, and the federal government got a lot more zeros in its checkbook, but it should be doing the same things.
We're the only country in the world that can actually has unlimited checkbook privileges. Everybody else buys our bonds because we're known as the reserve currency of the world. And for the many years, Japan and Germany, now China, have used competitive devaluations against us to wreck our export markets and our manufacturing market capabilities. City after city like Detroit, Cleveland, and others have been decimated by low-cost products coming in from Germany and Japan, especially automobiles and other areas.
So it's incumbent upon us to try and get a resurgence in manufacturing.
I think we can, and I think that we have to be careful. We have to understand when countries create a competitive devaluation, in other words, drop their currency way down so that their goods come in way under the cost of our goods. And we know what they're doing. They're subsidizing their exports, in effect, dramatically in order to knock us out.
In fact, that's the crux of the debate today about international trade agreements.
Well, I spent a good deal of my time when I was in government as negotiating trade deals with the European Union. And I found many times the European Union, in self-interest, would deal themselves a good hand. And sometimes not necessarily a fair hand to us.
So occasionally you had to get up and walk away from the table.
We did more than that. We retaliated.
Okay. And we have just a couple minutes remaining. Let's talk a little bit about what you would suggest that the administration of the United States government do. Now, it's probably too late for the Obama administration, but come January, we'll have a new president and a new administration. And what kinds of things would you recommend that they consider? I mean, we just said pay as you go rather than put it on the credit card. There's been a sequester imposed on military spending for several years. Should that continue?
Well, it's clear that we've fallen way behind in long-range development. I'm not talking about capabilities today. We have great capabilities. But don't be misled by the $600 billion that we spend and $300 billion by our potential adversaries. First of all, China downloads through cyber theft many of our intellectual property rights of our weapon systems and what have you, so that they're able to build weapon systems at a fraction, many times, of the research and development that we have to put in to our weapon systems. So they get more bang for the buck.
Ambassador, the time has flown by. I hate to have to end it there because we didn't get a chance to talk about wrangling entitlements or the bureaucratic expansion, but I would hope that there'll be another opportunity for us to do that in the future. You've been very generous with your time. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador J. William Middendorf II, thank you, sir. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Okay. Thanks very much, Mark.
Monthly, I receive a copy of the Military Officers Association of America magazine, MOA. Membership is open to those who hold or ever held a warrant or commission in any component of our military services, the Public Health Service or NOAA, and their surviving spouses. When you add the active duty members to the retired folks, you get a large number. This month's mag carried a retirement guide listing all the various retirement communities across the country, those that had advertised in the magazine over the last year. There are some states that have huge veterans populations in the retirement communities they live in. Lots of states have positioned themselves to attract veterans. I guess it wouldn't surprise you to know that none of the New England states had retirement communities advertising for veterans in the magazine. But on the real meat of this issue, if Rhode Island doesn't resonate with military veterans, who does the best job of attracting them? Answer: Florida. There were 10 retirement communities in Florida who advertised for veterans to come on down to live. Now, what are the arguments in favor of or against becoming a Floridian? There are roughly 1.6 million veterans who make Florida their home. Only California and Texas can claim to have more of them. Of the 1.6 million, just under 880,000 of these folks, as of 2014, were 65 years or older. Besides the climate, the factors that attract are no income tax, no state income tax, no tax on military retired pay, no inheritance tax, homestead exemptions, and veterans discounts across a myriad of activities. The enlightened folks managing Florida's affairs decided in 2014 to create a Veterans Florida organization with an annual budget of $2.84 million. Now that pays for staff, job training for vets, marketing, and all the other expenses you can think of with the intent of attracting and holding on to the veterans. Now you might say the property taxes must be high, sky high actually, to offset the lack of other income sources. But in the case of homeowners, Florida has a homestead exemption that provides all permanent residents with an automatic $25,000 exemption on property taxes. Now, home values between $50K and $75,000 get another $25K prorated. Veterans with a disability of more than 10% get another $5K off. Total disability means you don't pay any property taxes at all. When it comes to access to military bases, Florida has 20 of them. There are VA medical centers in 7 cities with 47 outpatient clinics. Bases close by mean commissary shopping, pharmacy access, military treatment facilities, private beaches, rental boats, jet skis, and camping equipment. And of course, what would a military base be without a gym? All these are available to active and retiree populations. Veterans Florida also offers business entrepreneurship advising and funds 50% of training costs to companies that hire veterans. So what can you do all day in sunny Florida as a retiree besides golf? Well, Florida has 159 state parks and 11 national parks. Military retirees get an automatic 25% discount at the parks. Well, my Rhode Island neighbors who spend 181 or more days in Florida say they come back to Rhode Island during the heat wave of the Florida summer. But the stats on weather seem to contradict that. Measuring the winter and summer temps in Pensacola, Orlando, and Key West, the geographic extremes in the state, you find average January temps 51.4, 60.2, and 69.3 in those cities. The July temps were 82.2, 82.7, and 84.5 respectively. So it really isn't broiling in the summer, and it doesn't freeze you out in the winter. Now, I decided to read what one of the Florida retirement communities says about itself. I looked at the Indian River Colony Club, located in Viera, Florida. Now, they say they are an active 55-plus country club community on Florida's Space Coast, with over 600 military vets living there. They have a par 72 golf course, a 24-hour staffing security, tennis, swimming, croquet, bocce, shuffleboard, and you can participate in theater, chorus, dance, painting, sewing, and crafts of all types. Reads like the ads for the Villages in Florida. Located near Patrick Air Force Base, a VA clinic, beaches, the Port Canaveral cruise terminal, etc., etc. Oh, and they are pet-friendly. That's it. I'm on the way. Thanks for watching, and God bless.